Well, good morning, everyone. And I would really like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to address you. What a tremendous crowd we have here today. What I would like to discuss really is what I call beyond compliance, moving to a culture of quality. As you know, CEDAR is moving to a reorganization of how we regulate pharmaceutical quality, and we're well into that process. And being the government, I can't stand up here and show you org charts and this and that, but I do want to talk about the philosophy behind this and what you might expect as far as where we're going. Now, by moving to a culture of quality, I mean the whole ecosystem. Not only manufacturers, but also the regulators need to move to a culture of quality, as well as the suppliers, the repackers, relabelers, and everybody else who's involved in here. And I'm very glad to see actually the next plenary session of this actual meeting is devoted to the topic of quality culture, because I believe that is essential and is really key to us achieving our mutual objective. And I hope, and we've stated our objective many times, I hope it is mutual, that is an agile, flexible pharmaceutical manufacturing sector that can reliably produce high-quality medicines without extensive regulatory oversight. And as each year passes, this is becoming more and more important because our public around the world, more and more worldwide, are relying on medicines to keep themselves healthy. And we need a robust sector that can reliably produce those medicines without tremendous oversight. And that quality culture, I believe, is the key to making this happen. Now, we, FDA CEDAR, have been moving in this direction for a decade, but relatively slowly. And now we're hoping for another big step forward. We have a number of drivers that are pushing us. The new generic drug user fee program that requires us to both have balanced scrutiny around the world on all facilities that produce drugs entering into the United States, as well as other provisions of the new FDA Safety and Innovation Act. And so with all of this on our plates, we really have to change the way we regulate in order to achieve these objectives that have been given to us by Congress and the American people. And so I think it's more important than ever to push forward. And we really need to work with you and as the scientific experts to figure out how to make this happen. Now, I want to digress a little bit, not really, but tell you kind of a story of something else I was involved in that has undergone a lot of change. And this actually affects us all in different ways. So this was in a different part of the biomedical ecosystem that has started on this journey about a decade ago, maybe a little bit more. Medical care, health care, had long been a professionalism-based system with self-policing and fairly vague standards of quality. And many of you, if you're young and healthy, this is okay, but if you're getting to be my age, you may be worried about this, right? The Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Science in the U.S. published a report called "To Err is Human." And this shocked the whole country. Many of you may remember this report. People had no idea of the number of mistakes, particularly preventable errors, that occurred in healthcare. And I participated in many of the ensuing discussions after this report, and I think some of the concepts and ideas that were developed in that sphere are applicable here too. After all, pharmaceutical manufacturing is part of the same ecosystem on another area of it. Of course, pharmaceutical manufacturing is many, many times more error-free than medical care. I know that's probably upsetting too, but that's true. Logs more, all right. So I'm not trying to make a direct comparison of the errors in the two systems. I'm talking about the philosophical approach to ensuring quality. A significant point of discussion around medical errors was to avoid a shame and blame game, as they were calling it. And that's traditionally what went on in medicine. And I was participant, victim, whatever, during my medical training in this. In this scenario, someone who admits to or is caught in a mistake is punished, ostracized, and generally blamed. The energy of all the participants is around blame and not around investigating systemic flaws or vulnerabilities that led to the problem. Everyone else assumes they are perfect, error-free, and they continue on as usual. And that's really how healthcare, to a great extent, was being carried on. This approach enables denial of collective responsibility and inhibits prevention of future problems and inhibits learning. Now, IOM and many experts in subsequent reports urged abandoning this approach and adopting in healthcare a quality of culture, a culture of quality, all right? And many of these things have been put into place in healthcare. The AHRQ in the United States, the Healthcare Quality Organization that works for HHS, sister agency of FDA, has anonymous safety reporting. So you can report anonymously various errors that happen so they can track and evaluate these. Many of you may know about the checklists that were developed for the operating room. Now, given the profession you're in, you may be appalled to hear they didn't exist before, right? But checklists were developed to make sure, you know, there was the right patient, the right operation, et cetera. The appropriate equipment was present, and so forth. And this dramatically decreased the number of errors occurring during surgery. There have been some striking successes in developing best practices by healthcare all working together. For example, recently they did a large study and they found that if you just bathe patients in the ICU with chlorhexidine daily, you can tremendously reduce the amount of infections, bad infections, that they are acquiring. And this simple act had really never been tested and just was sort of sporadically followed. And part of a culture of quality, of course, is mutual learning and a willingness to get beyond blame and talking about how can we all do better and thinking about that every day in a continuous improvement model. The IOM also developed a concept of never events for healthcare. And of course, these are also appalling. These are catastrophic and entirely preventable events. This should never happen, that everyone agrees this should never happen. One of these that was happening with some regularity, rare, but happening in the United States every year, was amputation of the wrong limb. All right, that should never happen. And now, you know, if you go in for surgery, they write on your limb, they identify which one, and they write no on the other limb. And they've cut this down quite a bit. Another is having a disoriented patient escaping from care and wandering the streets and coming to harm. Another is catching the patient on fire in the operating room. This occurs a number of times each year in the United States, and again is catastrophic and basically preventable. So that's sort of the story of healthcare. It has a very long way to go, all right? And it's fumbling around now and arguing about its metrics of quality and how do you measure and reinforce quality and so forth, but they've started down that path. How does this saga relate to pharmaceutical manufacturing quality? Well, I would say the original focus of FDA inspections long ago, and this has been a long history, in the early days was finding violations that could be subject to judicial action. And the reason to do that then was to establish a body of case law that established the policies that were linked to the statute. And so this fact pattern is a violation of GMPs, and you had to establish that in a statute. And so that was the tradition. this tradition has continued, although it's been sort of leavened with standard setting, harmonization, and educational activities of sorts. But the focus of our surveillance activities is still on finding specific problems. And that's okay, so that's good, or maybe pointing out problems. But when I ask, and I've done this recently again, what is the status of pharmaceutical manufacturing quality? What is the status of the inventory for products that are marketed in the United States? There is no metric that we have that can assess that. In fact, I have no idea. And as you know from quality culture, okay, without metrics, we don't know if we're getting better or worse or staying the same over time. And so that's missing from our practice of regulation. Like the healthcare system, in other words, and that's why I brought this up, there's focus on certain events or circumstances without understanding the state of the system. And that's really one of the things that we have to change in the way we do regulation. And this is why in our reorganization proposal, we're proposing setting up metrics-based surveillance, wherein the surveillance inspections that we do are really a data point that add to our assessment of that inventory of facilities. Now, just to carry on this analogy a little bit, if we consider pharmaceutical manufacturing, to me, they're similar never events, similar to healthcare. Now, we collectively, I think we regard repacking or relabeling as kind of low risk, ordinary type of activities, right? But recently, in the past 2 years, we've had this happen. A toxic drug is in a bottle or pack labeled as a relatively innocuous convenience drug that you should take frequently, right? That should never happen because it's entirely preventable and could be catastrophic. So I think there are things that we need to focus on. What is the actual risk to patients? And not just the technical risk, but what is the patient-focused risk? I think an absolute shortage of a life-saving drug should be a never event. The outrage of the healthcare community over some of these shortages where they have absolutely nothing to give their patients who might be premature infants or individuals suffering from cancer has been astonishing. Their outrage and their shock that this could happen. Now on shortages, we are doing better. There was a 50% reduction last year in the number of actual shortages that occurred. And this is probably because of the early notification allows the FDA to compensate for impending shortages. However, I would say these are fixes. These are Band-Aids we put on once the wound has occurred. These are not preventive. We don't have yet the preventive framework in place to prevent this. And of course, there are multiple root causes on shortages that need to be addressed, including a better culture of quality. Now, for less serious events, we at FDA also need to do a better job of analyzing the errors across the system instead of looking at each error individually that has occurred, each deviation, each recall, each field alert. What do we see across the industry? What are the patterns? What is causing this? And what is the root cause across the sector? We plan to organize actually pre-market review much more around dosage forms with specialization and with a focus on what I call failure modes. And I'm sure this is the incorrect terminology. However, that's what I call it, all right? I'm a doctor. Give me a break, right? Okay. Some dosage forms have predictable clinical failure modes. In other words, it's kind of like, if you don't write that this is the arm to amputate on the patient, you can predict at some point, somebody's going to take off the wrong arm. For example, in recalls, a high percent are not really attributable to what I would call GMP failures. They're formulation design problems that then play out over time. All right. For example, we keep seeing particulates in different parenteral products, right? And many of these are actually the active precipitating out for various reasons, right? Yeah, Sue was looking amazed. But no, that's what we're saying, because they've been formulated close to the point where they're no longer soluble, and if you chill them a little bit or do this and that and the other thing, then you get particulates. Obviously, if you warm them up and so forth, they might go back into solution, but people are unlikely to be wanting to do that, and they see cloudy vial that they're supposed to inject into a patient, okay? In addition, like for solid oral dosage forms, we see a lot of dissolution failures because we see transition of a state from amorphous to a crystalline state, and they're no longer as soluble. And these things are from first principles, right? These that have been known for 40 years, so they aren't that hard, all right? So it's hard to say. These are failures of quality by design, really. They're design failures. So we at FDA are going to be focused more on risk and also on how products can fail. We're going to specialize our staff on review because we see over and over again the same theme. Now, the definition of the quality of the drug product versus the quality of manufacturing has to focus on the customer. I think we're all agreed upon that, which is the prescriber and the patient. So, for example, this is why we hope to move, you've probably heard, toward clinically relevant specifications, right? Specifications that matter to the customer. And also end user interaction failure modes, which people haven't thought about as much as they should. For example, as you know, the scored tablets that fail to break in half, break into crumbles, or break into 3/4 and 1/4 or whatever. That is a failure mode, in my opinion. But equally important, and this is the risk approach, okay, equally important is to define what is not important clinically. So we need to understand the risk, which is the risk to the patient. That's the risk to quality, all right? What risk is there to safety and efficacy of the drug, and what is not a risk, and focus on those things that actually could pose a risk to the patient. So if it's not important clinically, then it is not really quality attribute of the product. It may be something you want to control because it's an attribute that you can measure, right? And it will help you with your process, but it is not a true quality attribute of the product. So we hope to have a true risk-based approach with specialization. In the post-market, we hope to focus on systemically using metrics and other ways to gather data and information to look at the status of the whole inventory. So to return to a culture of quality then, as we've said, and I think all of us agree that folks in industry are responsible for the quality of their products. And FDA's job is really to make sure that that happens. I think a culture of quality is the most important determinant of getting quality to the patient. And why is that? Because you can do everything right, you can do quality by design, you can do this, that, and the other thing. If the execution, if the technician puts the filter in sideways or something, or uses the wrong thing, then it's all for naught, right? And so the execution of mass production of these is really dependent on quality culture. Now, recognizing this, FDA wants to shift what we call performance-based regulation for this sector. In other words, are you actually producing adequate quality products? What are the indicia that shows that is the case? and using metrics and assessment of the quality culture at the firm and the commitment to quality, which is really where we need to be. And we're also, I am finishing up, I have a flashing light here. We also are going to measure the quality of FDA actions. We will have, as part of our new office, an evaluation unit that will look at what we cite pre-approval and what we cite in inspections, and evaluate our conformance to our own policies and standards. And if necessary, either change our policy and standards or change the way we cite things. And this will be linked to our policy and guidance development, obviously. Now, in the culture of quality, it's important that the manufacturing sector be empowered to continually improve and solve problems. And I have said this repeatedly, and not try to please regulators. That is not your job, right? Your job is to produce high-quality products for patients. But at the end of the day, of course, the firm has to be accountable for what goes right and what goes wrong. We at FDA are setting up an organization around these principles I've articulated: quality culture, risk, metrics, specialization, and so forth. I really look forward to working with you as we build the pharmaceutical manufacturing regulatory structure of the future. I think it's going to be a very interesting journey. Thank you so much.